W- Welcome to Authentic with Brazil 201. I'm your host, Brazil 201. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about a post-mortem blueprint that has gone viral over the last 2 days that came out, I believe, 3 days ago, called Deciding to Win by Simon Bazelon. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. I just see that name and I'm thinking Blaziken from Pokemon, which goes to show you where my brain is. It's quite interesting. It is a postmortem that has come out, and it shows a lot of the issues in regards to the Democratic Party. And I say this as someone who allegedly, just we're gonna put a lot of allegedlys here, may run for the New Jersey Senate in 2026. But I don't think I would run as a Democrat because I just think the D is too toxic, and I'd rather just do the independent thing. You get to be on the ballot. You don't have to deal with the woke activist primary voter electorate. But let's start at the top again. Look, in deciding to win, Simon, I'm just going to call you Simon Bazelon, shows how the center left, or centrism, can actually win without selling fairy tales, right? This isn't the Ezra Klein promising abundance if we just tax the rich and get rid of regulations, which, by the way, are things that probably also have to happen. But it's also not the Zohran Mamdani preaching communist fantasies that make swing voters run for the hills. Well, he did expand the younger electorate, and obviously I'm hoping for an Andrew Cuomo win. But there's not to say there aren't correct things both of them have done or whatever. But Bazelon is talking a strategy and honesty and playing to strengths instead of chasing impossible dreams. But before I get into the whole thing, I just wanna there's a chart that they post in their Substack and their book, which I purchased on Amazon, is that so the 2012 Democratic platform led with this that said, today our economy is growing again, Al Qaeda is weaker than any point since 9/11, and our manufacturing sector is growing for the first time in more than a decade. But there's more we need to do, so we come together again to continue what we started. We gather to reclaim the basic bargain that built the largest middle class and the most prosperous nation on earth. The simple principle that in America, hard work should pay off, responsibility should be rewarded, and each of us should be able to go as our talent and drive takes us. Here is what the 2024 Democratic platform led with. The Democrat National Committee wishes to acknowledge that we gather together to state our values on land that have been stewarded through many centuries by the ancestors and descendants of tribal nations who have been here since time immemorial. We honor the community native to this continent and recognize that our country was built on indigenous homeland. We pay our respect to millions of indigenous people throughout history who have protected our lands, water, and animal. I don't know what the fuck that bullshit is, but it does sound exactly like someone at an NYU women's gender class with a Rachel Maddow haircut would say. And that right there summarizes a lot of the fucking problems with the modern Democratic Party. And it is, as we're going to go into this that they mentioned, I think a lot of this comes from the staffer activist class they have hired that work in Democratic parties. And like voters obviously think they are too focused on nonsensical issues, identity issue, racial politics, however you want to call it, instead of real issues. And we kind of really saw this a lot in 2022 to 2024 when like DeSantis and Abbott bust all the illegals to New York and everyone's like, yo, we have an immigration problem. And then, Rachel Maddow and her fucking haircut was like, no, we don't. You're racist. Or inflation is real. And then, we had KGP saying, well, our data says that's not true. And I don't know if you guys have seen the wonderful media circuit that KGP is currently on right now, but KGP really, I like, amplifies the identity woke politics nonsense to a super saiyan level degree. Because everything she says is like, as a black queer woman, we need to be loyal to Joe Biden. As a black queer woman, like, it's like you couldn't write the type of Portlandian nonsense the way that woman speaks. And I think it shows how bad Joe Biden's judgment was to think this woman was competent at anything. Because clearly she has no modern communication skills, which probably really showed a lot of the communication efforts that were a problem in the Biden administration. But okay, let's go. First, the realignment that Democrats refuse to admit. In chart one of a report, a change in voter ideology from 2012 to 2022, it tells a story in one line. The electorate hasn't moved left. The Democrats over the last decade share voters identify as very liberal doubled, while moderate identifiers shrank. Republicans barely moved, and the Democratic Party leadership, staff, and donors shifted a ton to this hyper educated, upper income, urban base that sees politics through culture and identity first, something I would never fucking do. Meanwhile, working class voters, even like the non white ones, moved towards the right. And then between 2016 and 2020, non college Hispanic support for Republicans jumped over by 10 points. And black working class voters also drifted rightward in the 2022 midterms. And these shifts weren't about racism or misinformation, they were about inflation, energy, prices, and crime. And as their report bluntly puts it, voters who feel insecure in their daily lives are not looking for promises of transformation, they are looking for reassurance and control. And the center left's failure starts there. You can't talk equity to people who can't afford groceries. You can't promise abundance when every paycheck feels smaller than the last one. And you can't call voters reactionary for wanting to feel safe in their own neighborhoods. And then I want to start, too, the myth of abundance politics. The most biting section of Deciding to Win is its critiques of abundance politics. The report defined this as a style of left-leaning populism that promises universal everything. Universal healthcare, universal housing, universal childcare, without how voters actually experience scarcity. In a chart they have, voters trust by policy category, the Democratic Party scores the lowest on cost of living and managing government spending, while Republicans lead in economic growth and national security. And that is despite Trump's fucking tariff war. But the data's merciless, right? People don't trust Democrats to manage the basics. I don't trust them. And I say this as someone who I guess is a registered Democrat, but like I don't identify with the fucking woke bullshit, right? But they trust them to care, but not to deliver. And abundance politics, President Ezra Klein assumes that if you promise more, you'll win more. But the opposite happens, actually. As Deciding to Win shows, when voters think your platform is too big, too idealistic, or too expensive, their trust collapse. And between 2018 to 2020, Democrats' favorability among middle-income voters fell 9 points. Among independents, it fell 12. The report called this the credibility gap. And it's not about ideology, it's about believability. Voters aren't opposed to government action, they just want competence before compassion. Now, the persuasion gap, who Democrats stopped talking to. In Chart 11, they had a title called Turnout versus Persuasion Effect. And Deciding to Win models how Democrats could have won in 2020 and 2022 with a less turnout but more persuasion. The math is simple. There are more reachable moderate voters than there are mobilizable non-voters. And I think we're kind of seeing this play out in New York City in mayor race if Andrew Cuomo manages to pull this off. But that is a whole different podcast. You'll never get me to fucking support Zohran Mamdani. But look, the Democratic Party spends billions chasing the ladder, and it's easy to tell donors you'll expand the electorate, than to admit you're bleeding swing voters in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. But as the report notes, mobilization is a ceiling strategy, persuasion is a growth strategy. And from a practical standpoint, that means the center left needs to stop treating persuasion as betrayal. And if you tailor your message to working class moderates, you're not quote unquote selling out, you're trying to win. Chart 12 broke down the voters' priorities by education level, right? There's non-college voters rank cost of living, crime, and border security as their top issues. College-educated liberals voted climate change, racial justice, and abortion rights as their top issue. Both sets of votes matter, but one group decides elections in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina. And guess which ones Democrats have been ignoring? And then it's the cultural capture and elite blindness. The report's most brutal section isn't about the data, it's about the attitude. The Democratic Party staff and donor class have become culturally isolated. It reads the median Democratic campaign staffer today is under 35, urban, and has a college degree, probably has pronouns in their bio, probably has some foreign country's flag in their Twitter bio, and they live in a social media bubble that amplifies the loudest ideological voices and not the most representative ones. And they have a chart that says staff ideology versus voter ideology. And it plainly shows that Democratic staffers score far more liberal than the median Democrat voter on every major issue. And that explains why messaging around quote unquote defund the police, Latinx, and abolish ICE ever made it into the national conversation. Those ideals were niche academic concepts that metatized into slogans because nobody inside the room wanted to be an adult and say, this won't work in real life. And then the report argues that until Democrats rebalance their staff culture by hiring people from service, labor, military background, retail, and they'll keep mistaking online applause for public consciousness. And look, I've seen it firsthand. I'm in New York, and in the Common Quarter area where Zohran expanded the fucking electorate, where too many of the people work at the New York Times and MSNBC and all this, like live in that fucking 5 mile radius. Do not, first of all, this is the first rule that has to be, and I don't know if there's a way to do this without fucking breaking the law, but there's always ways around it. Do not hire people who have pronouns in their bio, in their resume, or their email signature. That right there will fix a lot of the problems because you already can tell their politics and if they're out of touch. Do not listen to anyone that thinks organizer meme on Twitter is good at what they fucking do. This is the wrong type of politics. I'm God hoping Andrew Cuomo can pull this off because let me tell you, the next step is that if Zoran wins, there's already a cancerous for having a D in most of the country. I think now the Zoran part is going to amplify it to a level we have not seen before that Democrats probably deserve to lose the next decade. I'm not saying Andrew Cuomo's a fucking great guy, but there is a thing where you get this, and I can't believe like fucking Liz Smith is so fucking happy about this, about Zoran and all this. Like when she fucking worked for Andrew Cuomo and all this fucking nonsense. Anyway, then there's economic populism done right. In deciding to win, the strongest is in showing how Democrats can reclaim economic populism without sliding into this far left utopianism, right? Voters still trust Democrats more on Social Security, Medicare, and workers' rights, and there are huge assets, but they're getting drowned out by the culture war. The report recommends what is called popular populism, combining economic fairness with pragmatic restraint. That means protecting what exists before promising what doesn't. And it's not about scaling down ambitions, it's about sequencing it. An example comes from state level experiment. In 2022, Josh Shapiro won by emphasizing competence, crime reduction, and education investment, not sweeping redistribution. His ads were about keeping kids safe and budget balanced, not transforming systems. And we've seen now Shapiro's governor. He managed to fix fucking I-95 in 10 days. And he has a 68 approval rating, and people trust him to get things done. Republicans like him. The center-left like him. The only people that do not like Josh Shapiro are activists because he does not talk like an activist, and voters rewarded him for this. But anyway, then the next part is what the center-left must do now. And this is where the diagnosed to win guys or people start stop diagnosing and start prescribing. In their final section, Reclaiming the Middle, lists 5 steps to rebuild a majority coalition. And I'll kind of summarize it by adding my own take on each. So first, it's recenter the economic message around cost of living. And the data is overwhelming. In every battleground state, inflation and affordability dominate. There are charts there. 24 showed 82% of voters listing cost of living as their top concern, outpacing abortion, guns, climate, Israel, Gaza. Democrats need to make affordability not an identity the headline of every campaign. This means leading with lowering healthcare costs, capping out-of-pocket prescriptions, and housing access. Also probably find a way to lower deductibles and things like this. Then also rebuild trust on safety and security. Voters don't want slogans; they want safe streets. When Democrats use plain language on crime, more officers, better training, no tolerance for repeat offenders, support surge across racial lines. The defund rhetoric lost those voters for years. Fixing it will take discipline and humility. Next, they got to speak human, not ideological. The report focus groups are painful to read. Swing voters say Democrats sound like social workers, not leaders. That's a messaging failure. People need to hear confidence, not therapy. The center left must rediscover plain talk. Tax bills, schools, job safety, everything else is noise. Modernize the coalition infrastructure. The staff and consultant pipeline needs a massive overhaul. More people from working class, military, and retail backgrounds must be at the table. Hire few comm grads. Stop hiring people with pronouns in their bio. more nurses, teachers, actually probably not public school teachers because they seem to be really bad at their job. I'm more of a private school type of person. I just fundamentally don't believe in public school because public school is a fucking disaster. That is my like Republican talking point on that part. Abandon abundance rhetoric and replace it with competence and fairness. Now here's what I think. I'm not saying this as an outsider throwing stones. I'm part of the story. I've been in these rooms where consultants mistake Twitter trends for public opinion. I have seen these annoying fucking pronoun and bio activists treat blue collar skepticism as betrayal. I've seen entire campaigns evaporate because they couldn't explain inflation in a sentence. The center left doesn't need to abandon its values. It needs to abandon its delusion that values alone win elections. Values are the foundation, competence, and the structure. You can't live in a blueprint. And I think that's what the Deciding to Win people capture very well. It's not an ideological document, it's a strategic intervention. And it reminds the Democrats that the country doesn't owe them votes, and the working class doesn't exist to validate elite guilt. You win by persuasion, not by moral lecturing. And the path forward isn't really complicated. Reclaim cost of living as a core message, lead with safety, fairness, and stability, hire staff who live paycheck to paycheck, and speak like you work at a Target, not at a DEI seminar, and promise less, deliver more. That's not cynicism, it's realism, and realism wins election. So yeah, the center left can win again by not offering abundance, not doing land acknowledgments and pronouns in bio and a bunch of other bullshit. But look, it is what it is. Either that or, you know what, you try the Zohran thing everywhere until you get blown the fuck out, like how Democrats probably should have got blown the fuck out in 2022. Because if Democrats got blown out in 2022, Joe Biden would have obviously had to drop out sooner. Maybe he fires KGP because she's a fucking idiot. And the massive rebuilding of getting rid of all these 75 and older would have happened earlier. But hey, the 78-year-old in Maine is clearly a great fucking candidate, isn't she? Or whatever other nonsense is happening. That's it. Anyway, that's it. Go buy the book on Amazon, Deciding to Win. What the fuck is this? Is Twitter? I am so sorry that I do not. The hell is this fucking thing? Let me get this right. I am sorry. I'm watching Dancing with the Stars. Oh, Simon Bazelon. I'll tag him when I put this up. Anyway, that's it.